Thanks, Chris. Oh, I gotta do the got it. Okay. Hi, I'm Stacy King. I have been working at VSAC for about 15 years now, 10 years in middle and high school, and then the last 5 years in the Adult Educational Opportunity Center program. And I'm looking forward to working with Carrie today to do some basics on financial aid in preparation for some much more interesting things coming up in the next few weeks. Carrie.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Harlow. I'm a member of the Career and Education Outreach staff at VSAC. I work with the Talent Search program with schools in Addison County, and I've been helping families do FAFSAs for very, very, very long time. I just wanted to let you know that today's presentation is Financial Aid 101. So if you were hoping to get FAFSA updates today, this is not the presentation. Today's presentation is really giving you the background of financial aid so that when we do the updates October 13th, you have the information you need in order to understand all the things that we're going to be talking about. So let's get started. So we're going to talk about applications and programs. We're going to go over the federal student aid and the FAFSA, Vermont grants, as well as VSAC administered scholarships. We're going to talk about education loans and give you some of the basics about that, as well as to go over some information resources that you all can use in your work with students. So those applications, the FAFSA is the big one, right? The free application for federal student aid is the application that most students will fill out in order to be eligible for financial aid. Additionally, students will probably fill out Vermont grant applications. That is an application for state-based aid. There may be institutional aid applications that students will need to fill out, and it's going to be very important for students to know if they need to fill out, for instance, a CSS profile, which is a specialized form for private schools, and also if the colleges are expecting any additional forms to be filled out by students. We're also going to talk about the VSAC Unified Scholarship Application on my VSAC. It's also called the USA. We love acronyms in financial aid. So please, when I'm speaking, if I happen to start speaking just in terms of letters and acronyms, go ahead and stop me. I can translate back to English. But we will talk about the USA. That's a very important application that many students in Vermont can fill out to be eligible for VSAC scholarships. It's one application that can be used for, I think, up to 60 different scholarships, so why not? We'll also talk a bit about other scholarship applications that students may fill out, and students will probably have loan applications that they're filling out, although that will happen later in the process for them. The loan applications really happen in the spring semester and sometimes in the early summer. So let's get started with the FAFSA. The FAFSA is required for federal student aid programs, including loans. So if a student just wants to be eligible for a student loan, they still have to fill out a FAFSA. It's also required for the Vermont Incentive Grant as well as for part-time grant programs, and it could be required for institutional financial aid and for scholarships. Let me give you my 60-second FAFSA elevator pitch. A lot of people will say, why should I complete a FAFSA? I don't think I'm going to be eligible. Well, that might be true, but here are the 3 reasons. One, if a student wants a federal student loan, which tends to be the best way for students to borrow, those loans have, favorable repayment terms, interest rates, they have all sorts of protections built in. If a student wants to be eligible for those, they have to file the FAFSA. In addition, in order to be considered for Vermont grant, you have to file the FAFSA. In addition, there are some colleges and universities that say, we need you to exhaust all of your other options for financial aid before we consider you for our aid. So we need you to fill out the FAFSA even for our merit-based financial aid at our school. We want you to have exhausted all those other options first. And then the other reason is because if things happen in life, and things do happen in life, having a FAFSA on file with a college or university or trade school is going to be very helpful in that when those special circumstances happen, you can begin the discussion with the financial aid office immediately and not have to worry about filling out an extra form in order to see if these circumstances that have changed may make your student eligible for more financial aid. So those are the big reasons why students should be filling out a FAFSA. How do you apply? The last time I attended a federal student aid conference in 2022, I believe it was more than 99% of all FAFSA filers will file electronically. That is the way people file. And so it's right on the FAFSA website. If you type in FAFSA.gov, it will take you right there. If you type in studentaid.gov, there's a link where you can apply for aid and complete the FAFSA. There's also a paper application available where people can download it and print it at studentaid.gov. But let me just say that's a pretty lengthy application. The online application has a lot of skip logic built into it. It will stop you if they think that they might be viewing an error. That won't happen with a paper form. The paper form also takes a lot longer to process. It could be a couple of weeks for that to process, as opposed to for the electronic version, it's within a couple of days. When to apply? Right now, we understand that the FAFSA for the 24-25 school year will be available sometime in December. We do not have an actual date yet, but let me tell you, the minute we know a date, we will be letting you all know. The key to filling out the FAFSA is this thing called an FSA ID. It is basically an electronic signature. It's used for completing and accessing the FAFSA on the web, as well as federal student loan entrance counseling and the master prom note, the Teach Grant Agreement to Serve documents, and there's an annual student loan acknowledgement that's available online that students can use their FSA ID to access and track how much student loan they have at the current time. So students will need an FSA ID, parents of dependent students will need an FSA ID, a spouse of a student, an independent student may need an FSA ID, and borrowers will create this unique username and password. It must link to a unique email address. So people cannot share an email address to use for their FSA ID. It has to be a unique email address. And we want students to know not to use their school email address, because those for some students go away. At some schools, those are turned off once they graduate. And at other schools, what happens is sometimes the email addresses will change. Students are still holding on to those old email addresses and they end up losing them. So creating a new free college and scholarship and job ready email address is going to be really important to use. They also have people answer 4 challenge questions. It's sort of the backup to the backup, because there are ways that you can get your username and password if you've forgotten them. But the challenge questions are if you don't have access to your email address anymore or your cell phone number. And there's also a way that you have to set up 2-step verification, so that every time you fill in your FAFSA or you access your FAFSA or your student loan documents, every time you log in, you will need that 2-step verification in order to verify that, yes, it's you, and to keep your information secure. And you can also do that with email, cell phone, or an authentication app. Totally up to you. So when we're talking about the FSA ID, some of the tips are have people have access and their email account open before they start to create the FSA ID. It's a lot less hassle to have that already open and be able to just switch to it as opposed to logging in. As of this year, students and parents must have that FSA ID created and have the account confirmed with federal student aid before they can even begin a FAFSA. So in the past, people could come to our forms nights and they could come in and they didn't have an FSA ID. They could sign up for one and complete their FAFSA the same night. That is no longer the case. They must have this all set up before they start. And then we recommend to have suggestions for additions to usernames, like adding a middle name or initial, adding a year, but not an identifier like date of birth. Or you can include a house number or last digits of your phone number. And there is a YouTube video available that talks about how people sign up for an FSA ID. Let's talk about who's eligible for federal student aid. This is right from the studentaid.gov site. But for most programs, students have to demonstrate financial need. And if they don't demonstrate financial need, they might just be eligible for an unsubsidized loan, But again, that federal student loan is a good thing. They have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. They have to have a valid social security number, with the exception of some students from some different areas. They have to be enrolled or accepted for enrollment as a regular student in an eligible degree or certificate program. They have to be enrolled at least half time to be eligible for the direct loan program. They have to maintain satisfactory academic progress. And they have to sign a certification statement on the FAFSA that says they don't owe money on a federal student grant, and that they'll only use their federal aid for educational purposes. And they have to show they're qualified to obtain a college or career school education, which a lot of times is verifying that they've completed high school, either with a high school diploma or with a GED. That brings up questions about whose information goes on the FAFSA. That is probably, Stacey, would you say that is one of the most common things that we get asked in VSAC outreach, is whose information goes on the FAFSA?
Definitely.
So for the 24-25 school year, the questions are, was the student born before January 1st, 2001? Oh my gosh, that year seems to, like, that can't be, really? As of today, are you married? At the beginning of the 24-25 school year, will you be working on a graduate degree, basically? Are you currently on active duty for purposes other than training? Are you a veteran of the armed services? Do you currently have children who receive more than half their support from you during the school year that we're applying for? Does the student have dependents other than children or a spouse who live with them and who receive more than half their support through the end of the school year that you're applying for? At any time since the student turned 13, were both parents deceased, or was the student in foster care, or was the student a dependent or ward of the court? As determined by a court in the state of legal residence, are you or were you the student, an emancipated minor? And does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you? This is different than custody. Legal guardianship is, and that's usually something determined by a court in your state. And then, is the student an unaccompanied youth who's homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? And usually this determination comes through the high school or the school district homeless liaison, the director of an emergency shelter, or the director of a runaway or homeless youth basic center or transitional living program. Added to that this year is a financial aid officer can also make that determination upon meeting with and working with the student. And so if all those questions are answered no, then the student's considered a dependent student for federal student aid, and they have to use parental information. There can be a dependency override from the college that can be considered. The student can fill out the FAFSA and say, I cannot provide parental information. They'll get a provisional student aid index number, but the student then has to appeal and send documentation to the college financial aid office, and they'll evaluate that information and determine whether the FAFSA may continue to process without parental information.
So, Carrie, can I throw a few questions at you?
Sure, go ahead.
What if I don't live with my parents?
So that's a great question, but if you don't live with your parents, that does not matter. Now, if you don't live with your parents because it's a safety issue, or because your parents are incarcerated or something like that, then that's going to be something that's worth appealing with the financial aid office. But if it's just that I don't live with them without anything else to qualify that, that doesn't make a student independent. Neither does the student claiming themselves on taxes and having no parent claim them on taxes. That is not a determining factor for financial aid.
Thank you. That's the two most common things we hear is I don't live with my parents and they don't claim me. And that is not how the federal financial aid rules work.
Correct. Correct. So for dependent students, which parent information is used? That is probably for folks, for my colleagues who work in high schools, this is the most common question we get. And that is which parent's information is used. And so if the parents live together, if the adoptive or biological parents live together, it is both parents' information used, regardless of their marital status. If they live together, it's both of them. If the parents don't live together, it's the parent who provided more financial support to the student in the past year. And if it's 50-50, you can consider things like who carries the student on their health insurance, or who maybe supplies the student with a car, or we were at a conference, Stacy and I were at a conference, and we were talking about this. And how do we determine if things are 50-50? And one of the participants said, well, sometimes when you're at one parent's house, you have lobster, and when you're at the other parent's house, you have hot dogs. So probably it's the parent with the lobster. That was one of the ways they asked us to think about that. If that parent who provides more support is married, even if the marriage is recent, then the parent and step parent have to be on the student's FAFSA. For independent students, if the student's married, it's the student and spouse's information, even if the marriage was recent. And if single, separated, divorced, and not remarried, then it would be the student only. So let's talk about this thing called the Student Aid Index. When a student applies for financial aid, they will get this thing called an SAI, or Student Aid Index. And it's basically the starting point. Colleges will use that information. The federal government will use it to determine whether the student's eligible for a federal Pell Grant, and colleges will use that information to determine a student's financial aid. The SAI is based on income as compared to federal poverty guidelines. So it's a certain percentage of federal poverty guidelines based on whether the parent is a single parent or a married parent. They're also looking at parent and student assets. They're looking at family size. How many people are living on that income? The age of the older parent, or if an independent student, the age of the student thinking. The older person is, the closer they might be to retirement, and there might be some assets needing to be protected for that purpose. Right now, I checked online yesterday, you can estimate your aid eligibility as well as SAI on the Federal Student Aid Estimator website. So if you go to studentaid.gov/aid estimator, you will be able to use that information, and students and families can use it right now. There's this thing that people hear about called prior income. And basically, when a student applies for financial aid, so current high school seniors or people heading to college next year, they're going to be using 2022 income on their FAFSA. For students who are looking to go to college this year, so there are still students looking to enroll in January, for example, if they're filing a FAFSA, they're using tax information from 2021. And it'll be important to note that in January, when we are helping families file FAFSAs, that we'll have 2 years up. There will be 2 years up and running. And so you want to make sure to choose the right year. And it's based on the year the student will be in college. So that's something really important to look at. If people want to get an early start at your schools or your organizations, and they decide, oh, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to do the 23-24 FAFSA, if they want financial aid for the next year, they're still going to have to file the 24-25 FAFSA. Now, obviously, we're using income information that's a little old, right? Things change pretty rapidly. So if there are changes to the student's circumstances and they're reporting 2022 income, big things have happened in 2023 for them, it's really going to be important for them to follow up with the financial aid office at the school about that. Let's talk about those frequent errors. So I can't tell you how many times people put in the wrong Social Security numbers, and they're not doing it purposefully, and they're not doing it because they don't know their Social Security numbers. Sometimes it's just a slip of a finger. So it's really important to check that. Also, the divorced, remarried, or unmarried but living together parents, sometimes there's a lot of confusion around who gets reported there. Legal guardianship and custody is often confused, and you heard me mention that before. That is something that is a common error. Income earned is sometimes a common error. We're hoping that's going to change with more direct information coming from the IRS. U.S. income taxes paid, sometimes people actually will report a different line number than what they should. Household size, sometimes people think of that as family size, and they include children who are long out of the household, or they forget to include a student who's in college and is normally in the home, but they're away at college right now. Real estate and investments, sometimes we see people reporting real estate that they shouldn't report, or reporting the value rather than the net worth, which is the value minus the debt. Other common things are not signing the FAFSA, or signing the FAFSA and then forgetting that last step of submitting. And so federal student aid does a really great job of getting in touch with students, sending emails out that says, hey, you started a FAFSA, but you didn't finish. You haven't hit submit. So you will get those reminders. The FAFSA acknowledgement that students will get is called the FAFSA submission summary, and you can watch for confirmation emails from the U.S. Department of Education. Students will get one confirmation for submitting the FAFSA. They'll get another one that their FAFSA has been processed. And they can also log in at FAFSA.gov at any time to check their status. What they will see, if you're looking at the screen, is that there's this menu, and it says there's an eligibility overview. And with that eligibility overview, you can actually see estimates of financial aid that might be awarded based on the information that was reported on the FAFSA. FAFSA verification, a number of students get chosen each year for this. It's a process by which it's basically a fancy word for prove it. And so if a student's chosen for verification, they can be chosen by the Department of Education, or they can be chosen by their college. The items to be verified will vary, but sometimes what we'll see for students is a verification of family size, like how many people are living in this household, list their names and ages. Sometimes they'll ask for confirmation of a student's identity or statement of purpose. So those things may come up. But federal aid will not be dispersed until the student completes verification. And so I had a conversation with a student recently who said to me, I got this request from the financial aid office, but I'm here and I'm just going to ignore it. And I said, boy, nothing good ever comes of that. You need to address that and answer to the verification and submit the things that they're asking for, because the aid will not be submitted. So let's talk about available student aid for the 23-24 school year. We don't know exactly what's available for 24-25 because budgets have not passed. But this year, the federal Pell Grant maximum for a student with no resources available for college is $7,395 full time. It is prorated for less than full time. Federal work study will depend on the funds available at the school and the student's financial need. And then the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. There's a $5,500 total for dependent first-year students. And for independent students, there's a $9,500 maximum that students can borrow their first year of college. And you'll notice that there are maximums of how much of that is subsidized. We're going to talk about subsidized and unsubsidized in a bit, but subsidized is the loan we like the best because the government pays the interest on that while you're in school. There's also a direct plus loan for parents, and the only limit on that is the cost of attendance at the school minus the aid receipt. And so sometimes colleges will give an estimate of a direct plus loan. It has nothing to do with whether or not the parent has the ability to repay that. It is really just the cost of attendance minus the other aid offered. There's some information on our websites. And so what I will tell you is that shortly after this is done, we're going to have this presentation posted on our education resources page. You will be able to link anywhere where you see an underline, you'll be able to link to see the federal grant programs or to get more information about the federal student loan programs for more details. And wow, that was a lot. So any questions?
We had one question, Carrie, come through that I'd love if you could spend just a few moments talking about, pertaining to when parents are unmarried but live together, maybe specific to same-sex or same-gender couples. Could you share how that would be reflected on the FAFSA? Sorry.
Sure. What will happen is a lot of times we have people who are living together but not with the benefit of marriage, but they are both the legal parents of the student. And what will happen is they will each have to report their information on the FAFSA. And so this year, how that's going to work is each of those parents will get an FSA ID. Each of those parents will be considered contributors to a student's FAFSA, and each of them will log in individually and submit their information for their student's FAFSA.
Thank you, Carrie. A question just came in here. When do students typically find out how much they are awarded, assuming they get all their information in December?
That's the best question ever. And I would love to say, oh, in 4 weeks, they should have their financial aid award. My answer to this is we will have to see. I would imagine that, schools that use a CSS profile and a student who's applying early decision, if they meet their deadline, they're going to get an offer of financial aid that will need to be finalized later. But for students who are regular decision or who are rolling admission, those students are probably not going to hear until, late winter, early spring, as far as what financial aid they'll be receiving from the institutions. Sorry.
And historically, we used to say about 3 weeks from when both the student has been admitted and has completed all of their financial aid documentation. That may be optimistic for this current year.
Right. And for students who are applying regular decisions at many of the big schools, a lot of times those institutions are letting their regular decision students know, usually in the spring, late March, early April, and a lot of them are sending out those decisions all at the same time. We have not heard if that's going to slow things down this year, but we're all keeping our fingers crossed that schools will be able to do that. And yes, a student does not hear about financial aid until they've been admitted.
We had one final question come in that I can actually address. I hope it's okay, regarding the Parent Plus loan. Even if you're not the FAFSA parent, you can still borrow the Parent Plus loan for your students, for your child's education. So you don't have to be the FAFSA parent or have to claim them on your taxes in order to borrow that Parent Plus loan.
Correct.
Correct. But Chris, I do want to add to that this year, because of the parent who provides more financial support, if that parent is taking out the plus loan and they weren't the parent on the FAFSA this year, they could potentially be the parent on the FAFSA next year, because that is a form of support.
Yes, very true.
Sorry, you guys are getting the financial aid 201. I didn't mean to do that.
That's weeds.
Sorry,
Out
all
of the weeds.
Great. Well, why don't we move on? Stacy's going to take us through the Vermont grant. Go ahead and take it away, Stacy.
All right, excellent. So the Vermont grant is actually the Vermont grants, plural. We have multiple forms of state aid currently. The Vermont grant, as it's traditionally called, refers to the degree grant. And that can be a full-time for early college. There's a smaller award for those students, and then it can also be for part-time. There's also the Vermont Advancement Grant, and that's meant for students that are either taking 1 or 2 college classes to try out school, or that are taking something that is not college degree or certificate related. And then most recently, we've added micro grants, which are small pools of money meant to prevent a student from dropping out of their program based for an emergency expense, a small emergency expense. So we'll go through the first section about primarily the Vermont degree grant, and then we will talk about the advancement grant later on. So to be eligible for any Vermont grant, you need to be a Vermont resident, also a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, just like on the FAFSA. You need to be enrolled or be enrolled in or enrolling in an undergraduate program leading to a degree, a diploma, or a certificate. So those are all versions of programs bearing college credit. You also have to have financial need as determined by the VSAC grant program, and that awarding is done based with some information from the FAFSA and some additional questions. You have to maintain satisfactory academic progress, similar to receiving federal aid, and be attending an eligible institution. It does not have to be in Vermont. That's one of the cool things about our state grant. It is portable. And we hope that those who are taking it out of state because their program is not available in state, or it's a better match, or it's closer, can let their legislators know how important it is for it to be portable. To be eligible, you have to not have received the equivalent of 10 full-time semesters of Vermont grants, or more accurately, people can think of that as you can get up to 10. The exceptions are if you are then enrolled in a Doctor of Medicine program at UVM, or enrolled in any Doctor of Veterinary Medicine program, you can exceed the 10 semester 10 full-time semester limit. Also, for the Vermont degree grant, you cannot have received your bachelor's degree, but we will talk about advancement grant later, which is eligible to bachelor's holders. And the other, again, the exception to not having had your bachelor's degree would be if you are in Doctor of Medicine or Doctor of Veterinary Medicine programs. You also cannot owe a refund to a federal or state grant or scholarship program. A refund occurs when you exit your program at the early part of the semester before you have accumulated enough time to be eligible for grant usage. And so the money is then supposed to be refunded to the program. So don't leave. In order to get the Vermont grant of any kind, it begins with the My VSAC portal. So this is really important as people are helping students apply for aid, is that the My VSAC account is the student's account, just like the FAFSA is the student's FAFSA. You're going to use this My VSAC account throughout your time in taking any kind of training or education beyond high school, and you can use it for both the Vermont grant and VSAC assisted scholarships, as well as the advancement grant and some forgivable loans that we'll talk about. The one thing that people forget to do is update their contact information. So VSAC and your college have no way to know if your email has changed or your phone has changed unless you update it. Same with your postal address. So be sure to keep that up to date. When you create the account, it's a two-step process. So you put in your information and an email address, and then they send a link to your email address to then create your password and challenge question. If you forget, you follow the prompts to retrieve your username or retrieve your password. And if that is not successful, you can call VSAC Vermont Grants and they will help you get in. Please do not create a new account. It will create challenges for you on the back end. And this is sort of what it looks like, a little snippet of the screen there. This is the top edge of the vsac.org page. And you're going to fill out the degree grant application in October, starting October 1st or later. And it's available throughout the year until all eligible funds are used or allocated. We have not seen it run out in a very long time, but it is theoretically possible. So we do encourage people to complete the degree grant application sometime, fall and winter. But if you're later than that, when you remember it, we still want you to apply for it. So again, vsac.org, and then at the top sort of center of the screen, there's a My VSAC button. You can link, maybe, we don't know. We think you're going to be able to link from the FAFSA, right, Carrie? This has historically been something you could do for the last few years. When you finished your FAFSA, there would be a confirmation page, and there'd be a button where you could start your state application for your state-based aid. That is likely to be there as well this year. But remember, the Vermont grant will be available in October, and we don't think the FAFSA will be available until December, or we'll say at least December. So you may want to do it Vermont grant first, FAFSA second. Carrie, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, I was just going to add that the Vermont grant application is very simple because we will get a lot of information from the FAFSA. And so if people are looking for something to do because they're antsy, and it's very easy to apply for a Vermont grant. And almost the same arguments can be made, my elevator pitch for the FAFSA, almost the same arguments can be made for the Vermont grant application. One, because students who aren't eligible for Pell have been eligible for Vermont grants in the past. So students should apply. You never know until you do. And it's an easy application. And then the other reason is if things happen, you have that application on file. And so there were a number of situations, for instance, during COVID, when we had additional funds for students and students had to have applied for a Vermont grant to be eligible for them. So get that application in.
Yes. It's also the case that sometimes there are state supported programs through the Vermont state colleges. but they do require that you have completed both the FAFSA and the Vermont grant. So we always encourage people to do both. It can't hurt to ask if you're eligible. Great. This is what the page will look like when you click that My VSAC button. It'll bring you here. You're going to, if you're brand new, click the Register Now button. And if you have already registered, you're going to do the login. Your My VSAC username is your email, and it is the email that you put in when you created this account, not what you update to. So again, we encourage you not to use the high school email, because that may not be accessible in the future. Great. And then once you are in and have signed in, you'll see this page with the happy blue buttons. And the blue button you want to do first is work with grants. And that is going to bring you to some options. If you have never applied for a Vermont grant before, this is the page you're going to see, the current year options. So right now it says 23-24. If you're doing this after October 1st, you'll also have the 24-25 Vermont grant application option. And remember to pick the year that you want the money for. If you have already done this application before in previous years, or an advancement grant application, then you will get a screen showing your most recent year of application. And if that happens, then over on the left, you just want to choose Apply for a Vermont Grant, which Carrie has brought her cursor to. And that is going to bring you back to the current year pages. It may ask you a question of, did your program start before July 1? And it's asking you that because that is the date at which the academic year switches. So school year ends the June 30th, July 1 is the new year. So if your program started before July 1, you want the previous academic year. After July 1, you want the next academic year. Great. And as Carrie said, most of the information that the Vermont grant is going to be calculated from does come over from the FAFSA. So when you complete your Vermont grant application, if you do it early in October, it's going to sit and wait for the FAFSA information to come over in December or later. It's automatic if you designate Vermont as your state of residence, that it will go to VSAC and just wait for a FAFSA. It will give you a reminder if it's been a while since you submitted the Vermont grant application but did not add a FAFSA. The income is based the same as the FAFSA, the prior year, as Carrie described. And I tell people that they used to ask the most recent year, but there's this space of time between January and April where people have not done their taxes, and people would guess, and they would not be very correct. Then they would have to go back and update it. So instead of asking the previous year, they went back one more year so that it would give space for everyone to have completed taxes if they were supposed to have done. Sometimes that makes more sense why we're asking for prior year. The asset information on the Vermont grant, some comes from the FAFSA that was reported, but there's also the primary home value and debt is added to the Vermont degree grant application. It is not on the FAFSA, so you should not report your home on the FAFSA, but it is added to the Vermont degree grant application. You get notified primarily by email first, also in notifications within the My VSAC portal. So if you're checking your account, you'll see in your to-do list when you have requests for information, they will also send an email. If you don't log back in within 20 days of a request for information, then there will be a paper letter also mailed to remind you that it's waiting for something. The most common things it might be looking for would be copies of tax returns or W-2s, a parent's income and asset worksheet, or yeah, that's about it. Those are the two common ones. There are some other worksheets, but those are the most common requests. For special and unusual circumstances for both the FAFSA and the Vermont grant, you should let your college financial aid offices and VSAC know if there's been a change in employment status, if someone has reduced hours or lost a job since the 2022 information that will be reported on the 24-25 FAFSA. If there were Medical and dental bills that were not covered by insurance, or you have very high insurance costs or deductibles. If there's been a change in the marital status of those being reported on the FAFSA. If there were unusual dependent care expenses, if you are a dependent student by all the questions on the FAFSA, but yet you are not able to provide parent information due to incarceration, abusive situations, inability to locate the parent, or there are other specific reasons, you should let, again, your college financial aid office and VSAC know. And natural disasters, which many of us have experienced very recently with the flooding. Things that are not reimbursed by insurance or FEMA can be considered a special or unusual circumstance to then adjust your calculation for your Vermont grant and for potentially for your FAFSA. When we talk about communicating special and unusual circumstances, it's very important to remember that the College Financial Aid Office and VSAC are two different entities who are not sharing that notification of special or unusual circumstances. So there's no way, if you let your college know, that VSAC will know it happened, and if you let VSAC know, the college is not going to know what happened. So it's important to let both entities know that something has happened. All right. Do you want to throw some questions in there?
We've had a couple come through that I think would be excellent for this stage. I'm going to read them in the backward order they came in. Going to your most recent conversation about the Vermont grant application, is primary home value based on local taxes, or how could I obtain that value?
The request is for the value of the home, the market value of the home. So if you were to put it on the market next week, what could you get for it? That is a best estimate based on your current knowledge. So it is not the assessed value, but many people will use the assessed value as a starting point and then determine, is it now worth more or worth less than it was.
Thank you, Stacy. Shifting gears a little bit, can financial aid issued by VSAC, such as the degree grant, could that be used at international universities?
With the exception of a few schools in Canada, no. Most aid cannot travel out of the country. There are federal and then state regulations preventing that. There's a lot of background to that, Carrie. But my short answer is, other than a few institutions in Canada, it does not travel.
There unfortunately is not a specific list available. That was a follow-up question that came in. We don't have a list of available schools. However, one of the general rules I will share is if the Canadian institution accepts Title IV federal aid from the United States, it's usually a pretty good indicator. For any other institutions, we would recommend that you give our grant department a call. Thank you. The last question is actually a follow-up to the plus loan conversation from earlier. I just want to throw out there, yes, if the parents, both parents can apply for a plus loan for a single student. That was a question in the case of a divorce scenario. Could both divorced parents apply for a plus loan? I'm happy to confirm, yes, they can.
They can. The limit to the total borrowing is the cost of that student's attendance minus aid that was already offered, regardless of how many people apply.
And that was the last question pertaining to this section. We may have some we'll circle back to at the end. I want to try to keep them pertaining to each section as we go through.
Great.
Go on.
That sounds great. Thanks. So let's talk a little bit about VSAC assisted scholarships. I should mention that VSAC administers a little more than $6 million in scholarships. And so we are a source of financial aid for many students, and it's important that students have this information and apply. So for VSAC assisted scholarships, our scholarships booklet will be available online next week for students who are attending college in 24-25. It will be in high schools and some college financial aid offices as well in early October. The VSAC scholarship application will open October 1st, the same time as the Vermont grant application. So there is time. If people are still waiting to do the FAFSA and they're antsy, this is something they can do. They can research some of those scholarships and look into applying using that unified scholarship application. People will access the VSAC Unified Scholarship application the same way that they will the Vermont grant. They'll log into My VSAC. Instead of choosing Work with Grants, they'll choose Work with VSAC Assisted Scholarships. And we've got some best practices for you. Let me just say the deadline for applying for the 24-25 school year will be February 14th, 2024. That February 14th deadline is to get all of the information in, not just the Unified Scholarship application. And many scholarships do require extra documentation. So don't just meet those deadlines, beat them. You can file the Unified Scholarship application in October and then follow up with the information, and you have time. Students can check to see if everything has been received. There is a status page on the VSAC, on the My VSAC scholarship information. There's a place where they can check the scholarship documents and they can see what has been received and what hasn't yet. You need to allow a day for documents to show as uploaded to My VSAC, because as things are uploaded, they're uploaded to the cloud, and then overnight they're downloaded into My VSAC. So if someone submitted something, for instance, on February 14th, it shows up as submitted on February 14th, but it won't show up on their My VSAC list until February 15th. And that sometimes is worrisome for students. It's another reason why you shouldn't wait till the last minute. Regarding organization, it is the student's responsibility to keep track of the scholarships that they applied for, but it's on their My VSAC account. They can see which scholarships they applied for. They can see which documents are required. And what's really cool is if a student needs a transcript, for instance, from their high school, and that transcript needs to be uploaded for 3 different scholarships, the school only needs to upload 1 transcript, and VSAC will end up making all the copies for the scholarship committees. But it's the student's responsibility to keep track of all this. We want to encourage students to allow time for this to happen. So if they apply at the last minute on February 14th and everyone's gone home from the school counseling office, there may not be anyone to upload a transcript. So really important to plan so that this can be done. I can mention that if you know a student's going to be applying, but they're probably going to apply last minute, and you work at a school, you can mail the transcript in. It's just you can't upload in order to do that because the student hasn't filed the application. The student has to have filed in order for documents to be uploaded. Also, that whole, not waiting until the last minute. I can't tell you how many times I have been in school counseling offices and students are walking in on the day of the deadline and saying to their school counselors, hey, could you do a recommendation for me for VSAC scholarships? We all know that's so cringeworthy, and we don't want to overload our school counselors. So we want to make certain that students have this message. And if the school, I mentioned that if the school knows the student's going to apply, but the documents can't be uploaded, they can mail them. Of course, that costs money. So everyone would like students to upload if possible. The important thing to keep in mind is that those documents have to be postmarked by the deadline. Many of us understand what postmark means, but I will tell you many high school students do not understand what postmark means. So it needs to be through the post office on that deadline day. So let's talk about best practices. Really important to communicate with faculty and staff about labeling requirements as well as deadlines. I think sometimes people, when students are asking, they don't always give all the information that's needed. You can actually make a copy of that page in the VSAC scholarships book that shows an example and the layout that we need. When we receive about 25,000 pieces of mail, electronically or by paper, and we're trying to figure out whether this is recommendation 1 or recommendation 2, it's really helpful to have that right there where we can see it and have it labeled. It's really important for students to follow the instructions as far as meeting the minimum word length, answering the questions that are asked. Sometimes students will just submit their college admissions essay, which is helpful, but it doesn't always answer all the questions for the scholarship. And that would make them probably less competitive than students who are answering the questions. Recommendations must be on letterhead or signed. We do see spelling errors. We do see grammatical errors. We try not to, grade students down for that. But it's important to remember that scholarships are competitive. And so you want it to look the best, and you want to make sure that you're meeting all of the requirements. We understand that seniors are busy, and we understand that school counselors are busy, and we understand that teachers are busy, and they're the ones being asked for the recommendations. So we're really hoping that we can use that extra time that we're not filing the FAFSA maybe to apply for other things like the VSAC scholarships. Any questions about scholarships?
We had one question come through. I'm not exactly sure if it's specific to scholarships, but the question is, are there funds available for students still in high school or without a high school diploma?
So funds available for students in high school. There are some VSAC scholarships. You have to look through the scholarships book. There's only a couple, but there are some, for instance, that early college students could apply for. But remember, that would mean they would be applying as a junior in February of that year before. There's a Vermont grant for early college. There's also, for students who qualify for early college, if they get the early college grant, they can also qualify for $150 book stipend. If they haven't exhausted that already, they can get a $150 book stipend mailed from scholarships to also help them with books. So there's a little bit of extra funds with the early college folks. And for students still enrolled in high school, that's pretty much it. Students who are dual enrollment can also qualify for that $150 check to help with expenses that they have. That happens through the high school counseling office or whoever does the vouchers for the department or for the Agency of Education. When they do the voucher, they have to verify that the student will have extra expenses. For instance, it's not a course offered in the high school that has books supplied and everything. The student has some extra costs, whatever those might be, and that the student's eligible for free or reduced lunch. With those sorts of things, then the student could be eligible for that $150 for dual enrollment.
Perfect. And they did come back also inquiring about anything state or federal related. Is there anything you can add regarding other sources of financial aid beyond scholarships for students either in high school or those without a diploma?
Well, I was just going to add in, there is no federal eligibility for students who do not have a high school credential, with some limited exceptions. But those that are currently in high school and doing early college, for example, are not eligible for federal aid. Even though they will fill out a FAFSA as part of the Vermont grant application, they will not actually be eligible for federal aid. There is a loan product through VSAC that students can access if they are doing early college and are on-campus students, and they should reach out to VSAC for further information on that.
And any thoughts on how that would impact home study students? Is there anything different there? Nope, same
No.
case.
Nope, same eligibility.
That's all the questions that have come in now for this topic. We've got a couple of FAFSA related. We'll hold on until the end.
Great, because we're running out of time and I want to make sure that we cover everything. And I will mention that Stacy's going to talk about short-term funding for people who maybe don't have a high school diploma but have been out of school for a while. So we do want to talk about that. I want to give that plenty of time. So I don't mean to gloss over loans, but I do want you to have information about federal loans. As I mentioned, that requires a FAFSA for a student to get a federal direct loan. And the college is the one that determines eligibility and also originates the loan. For students, the types that we talk about are subsidized and unsubsidized. And I said everybody loves the subsidized loan because the subsidized loans, the government pays the interest while the student's in school. The unsubsidized loans, the student is responsible for that interest while they're in school. They can either pay as they go on that interest, or they can let it just add up and they repay it when they're done with school. And as a matter of fact, that's how it's set up generally. But only undergrads are eligible for subsidized, which means students working on their first bachelor degree. It's based on the student's financial need, and the maximums are based on the year in college. So we mentioned earlier, a first-year student has a maximum of $5,500. I'm going to show you a slide that shows you how that works for each year. There's entrance counseling that has to be submitted, and that's completed on studentaid.gov. And most times students are completing this at the end of their senior year, beginning of their summer before college. There's also a master promissory note that the student has to fill out, and it's electronic generally and completed on studentaid.gov. But there are some schools that take the option of doing paper, or the borrower can request paper. But the post-secondary institution will instruct students on how to complete that. And that will be, the college, university, or trade school. I want to mention that there are some trade schools that are eligible for Title IV funds. Chris mentioned Title IV eligibility, which is eligibility for federal student aid. Here in Vermont, Advanced Welding Institute and Aveda are both eligible for federal student aid. So they're eligible for, federal aid, state grants, as well as some VSAC scholarships.
And Carrie, can I just jump in when it says based on student financial need, what it is saying is whether it is subsidized or unsubsidized is based on financial need, but anybody, regardless of need, can borrow unsubsidized loans.
Yes, thank you. That's correct. That's correct. Thanks for clarifying that, Stacy. I mentioned we were going to talk about not only cumulative borrowing, but also the amounts per year. So we have dependent students on the left and independent students on the right. Independent students have the ability to borrow more. Let me just tell you the maximum amounts of the subsidized loan. So the first year, it's $3,500. The second year, it's $4,500. And the junior and senior year, it's $5,500. The rest, the student would probably, if they have full subsidized loan eligibility, they still have some that's unsubsidized. Those maximums are the same for independent students. So what that means is at the first year, that student's going to have $3,500 of subsidized loan if they're fully eligible, and another $6,000 of unsubsidized loan. And then we see the cumulative borrowed. What I can tell you is that the maximum amount a dependent student can borrow is between $31,000 and $32,000. I think it's $31,500. And so if a student's spending a fifth year in college, they might run out of federal student loan eligibility. That's a potential. So I wanted to give you the interest rates. Those interest rates are for the current year that we're in right now, 23-24. Those interest rates get updated every year as of July 1. And those are set by the federal government, and it's tied to the Treasury rate. So undergrads this year, the interest rate is 5.5%. The Direct Plus loan is 8.05%, and there's an origination fee. And what that means is if a student's borrowing $5,500 in federal loan, it's more like $5,442 that ends up being paid to the school. And so that's really important for students who have this tied to the dollar, and they have this figured to the dollar, that they want to make sure that they know there's these origination fees. It's much higher for that Direct Plus loan. So again, if parents are thinking about borrowing and they're only borrowing as much as they need for the bill, they need to build in the fees and be ready for that. The Federal Direct Plus loan is available to parents of the dependent undergraduate students, as well as to graduate and professional students to help pay for college costs. The Plus loan was short for parent loans for undergraduate students. And now there's the Graduate Plus, which interestingly enough is for students, not for parents, but okay. And the maximum Plus loan is the cost of attendance at the college minus aid offered. And some colleges will list the Plus eligibility on their financial aid notifications. And it's really important to keep an eye out for that, because for some students, it looks to them like I'm covered. I'm covered. My college costs this, and I have this much financial aid, and I don't have to come up with anything. But the reality is there's a Plus loan on there. And so part of the conversation that we are sometimes having with students is, do you see this loan? This loan is a loan for your parents. Is this a loan your parents are planning on taking out or can afford to take out, right? That is something that's really important, because when a college determines Plus loan eligibility, again, Their eligibility standard is the cost of the institution minus the financial aid they offer. They are not thinking about the parent's debt load and whether or not they can handle that. So really important family decisions have to be happening here. For non-federal loans, VSAC's a lender of non-federal loans. They're available for students who need educational financing beyond what they can borrow in federal student loans. When we're talking about college costs at $70,000 a year, and you say the maximum federal loan a student can take out who's a dependent is $5,500, that may leave a gap. And so these private loans can actually fill in this gap. We have a publication called My Education Loans. It was done with financial aid folks. It was also done with college students and parents to help learn more about this. So I wanted to mention that, yes, we are a lender of non-federal loans, but at the same time, there are private loans available. This publication does not push VSAC loans. It really talks about the realities of borrowing. And let me add to that, for dependent students, the realities of borrowing is if you need a private loan, you will probably need a co-borrower or a co-signer, and that's really important. When you're comparing and you're thinking about non-federal loans, students need to consider interest rates, whether they're fixed or variable. A lot of institutions have teaser rates, and they'll say you should apply. You could get a rate as low as 3%. And then you apply and you find out the rate is actually 9%. And you say, wait, what am I doing? You can shop around and it will not affect credit scores. So I wanted to mention that. Certainly you always have the option to pull the plug when you've applied. There are fees sometimes involved. VSAC's loans do not have a fee. So I wanted to mention that. There are repayment options to consider. When do you have to start repaying? And there may be other benefits like interest rate reductions for auto pay or a cosigner release. For instance, with our loans at VSAC, if a student has had good repayment for 48 months, we could look into a cosigner release. No, you can't pay 48 months in advance and use that and say, I'd like to release my cosigner. You don't get to do that. It's really 48 months of payments. Any questions about loans? Really, we are talking about loans in the spring because students are waiting to hear about their total financial aid package, including their VSAC and local scholarships.
We do not have any questions coming in through chat or Q&A.
Great, so let's move this along to the short-term training, which I know Stacy is one of our experts about this. And so I really, every time we do this presentation, I learn more from Stacy. So I'm going to be listening too. I hope I don't get distracted. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with some sources of aid, and for one set of these, it's really applicable to anybody, any learner. So some of these could apply to people who are taking a certificate or a degree program through college, as well as short-term training. So employer contributions, important to check with your employer if they do tuition reimbursement, or if you have a dependent student, if they can do tuition payments or reimbursement for your dependent student. If you are eligible for Veterans Administration benefits, definitely look into what educational opportunities there are there. Higher Ability Vermont is an amazing agency in Vermont that works with any Vermonter who identifies as having a physical, mental, or emotional disability and a barrier to work, and they can assist not only with potential training funding, but also with resume writing and all kinds of wonderful adaptations to make work possible. Department of Labor is also a wonderful agency to work with to find training as well as employment supports. They have youth programs as well as adult programs and programs for industries that have undergone a shutdown, so business closed. There's also scholarships, and scholarships, we talked a little bit about some of the VSAC scholarships, and it's important to know that some of those scholarships are actually open to students who are not certificate, degree, or graduate students. And so those scholarships would say any student in the description, and you could potentially apply for them if it's relevant to your topic. And then we're going to move into some of the things that are specific to short-term applicability. So the advancement grant we're going to talk about in a lot more detail. and then some registered apprenticeship options. Program and provider funds is similar to when we say check with your college to see if they have scholarships. Same idea here for short-term training. Check with the provider of the training or the program if they offer any reduced tuition or scholarships or grants. The Vermont Trades Forgivable Loan Scholarship. Sorry, Carrie, can you remind me, did we add in a slide on forgivable loans?
We might not have, because that might be something they're going to talk about with the state updates, but you can
Yes, we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail at the state updates. But the short version, there are some 0% interest forgivable loan scholarships that are being offered in high demand sectors for programs that can range from short term, a few weeks, to potentially up to an associate's degree. And they are 0% interest loan that can potentially be forgiven with 1 year of eligible work in Vermont. So let's move in and talk a little bit about the advancement grant. This is one of the Vermont grants, so remember, you do have to be a Vermont resident to be eligible. It is currently open right now for programs that start before June 30th. So remember, this academic year will end on June 30th. And then the new form for next academic year, 24-25, will be up in May. So just keep an eye on that date of which application, which academic year you want. And it's meant for either coursework or training that is not for college credit, or that is for college credit, but 1 or 2 classes to prepare for further training, or to switch programs, or to increase your employability in your current job. There is a limit to how much advancement grant you can be awarded each year. Currently, that is a $7,500 limit, and that is regardless of how many turns you take. You can't have more than 2 terms of any state grant in an academic year, and the limit applies regardless of if it costs that much for a single term or multiple terms. That's the max you can get. You can be awarded up to 6 advancement grants in your lifetime. And again, it's going to use prior federal tax returns and W-2s. Same idea of not asking for the most recent year because you may not have filed your taxes. And these can be mailed or uploaded within the MyVSAC portal. And I believe we have an image of the MyVSAC portal next. So again, you log in or register if you haven't created an account. And when you're in and you get to the blue buttons, you choose Work with Grants. And then you want to choose the advancement grant application. People make mistakes, I will say, and submit the grant that they did not mean to, and that is okay. You will submit the other one and just send an email to grants at VSAC to identify which one it was you actually intended to apply for. But hopefully we can catch you before that happens. When you're in the MyVSAC portal and you've submitted a advancement grant application, what you will see in the awards and enrollment section is shown on this page. It'll show what the school is that you're doing your training. This one is an LNA, a licensed nursing assistant program. And then it will show the amount that was awarded, and if it has already occurred, it will show when it was dispersed. That was a really short version of that. I'm going to add in, there are also scholarships specific to non-degree work, such as the Curtis Credential of Value scholarship that the adult education counselors through VSAC can nominate students for. And the Vermont Trades, again, is a 0% interest forgivable loan program that students can utilize to pay for tuition and potentially licensing fees and exams in a high demand field. And those are all both the Vermont Trades and the advancement grant can be applied for in that MyVSAC portal. The Curtis Credential of Value scholarship would be working with an EC education counselor such as myself. Questions on non-degree training?
We have not had any questions come in through the chat or the Q&A.
And so one thing that I would add is that in order to get the advancement grant, you do not have to have a high school diploma, but you do have to be out of school. How long, Stacy?
3 months.
3 months. So for
Yes.
instance, there is sometimes some confusion because some students will think that they could get non-degree funding for driver's ed when they are in high school, and that is not the case.
That is not the
just
case. However,
right.
once you have left high school, you can use an advancement grant for driver's ed training, which is good to know for those. And if you have left school but are in an alternative high school completion program, then definitely meet with one of us so we can talk about what the options are for aid.
Great. Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about information resources, because I know that when I go to meetings or when I get an email and I'm like, oh, this is great information. And then a month later, I need to go find it. And wow, do I have problems with that. My organization skills need to be a bit better. So these are my go-tos for financial aid resources, and I hope they will become yours. The financial aid toolkit is a federal aid toolkit, and it has where it says search tools and resources, you can find handouts, you can find videos, you can find social media posts. There's all sorts of things that you can find, including a whole page about the new Better FAFSA that's coming forth. So I have been using this toolkit a lot, and I recommend it to folks. In addition, we have EdPro News that you can sign up for, and you can get those news and updates. And we also have a financial aid resources for paying for college, as well as for education professionals, where we will have a lot of our handouts that we referenced today. So for instance, that handout about who's my parent when I fill out a FAFSA, or the handout that's about am I dependent or independent for the FAFSA. It's hard to remember all those things. That was 3 whole slides, folks. So you can find those right from our education professionals page. We've got that there. We'll also have, we will also have on that page videos from our trainings. So this one and the ones coming up. And we will also have the PowerPoints. And I mentioned we will have the links live in those PowerPoints, so you could click on them and you could find some of these resources as well. Wanted to give you a reminder about the federal updates. If you were here to learn about the new FAFSA, we didn't talk a lot about the new FAFSA. We did give you a little insight. But the FAFSA updates and federal student aid updates, that information will happen Friday, October 13th, from 1 to 2:30, and you can find the registration link on our events page at vsac.org. And then the VSAC and state updates, where we're going to hear much more about the trades, interest-free loan scholarship, and a number of our other programs that we launched this year and the past year. That will be Tuesday, October 24th from 1 to 2:30, and that registration link is also on our events page. We really appreciated that you spent time with us today. This is my contact and Stacy's contact information in case you need to be in touch with us. I also want to give a plug. Chris Berry is the supervisor of our VSAC Resource Center. And the VSAC Resource Center, there's Chris. The VSAC Resource Center is an amazing resource, and they right now are helping families with setting up FSA IDs if you have people who need help with that. They will also have information about helping families with filing FAFSAs virtually or in person in the VSAC Resource Center in Winooski. And you may see some of us, VSAC outreach counselors all over the state this fall, talking about the FAFSA updates, helping people get started with their FSA IDs, and thinking about what they can do while they wait for that FAFSA to open. So I imagine we will be seeing you all very soon at one of these events or another. And thank you again for your attendance today. We actually got done a little bit early, but we'll hang out if more questions come up. And we wish you the best in this coming school year.
We do have 2 FAFSA questions that I think would be excellent if we could touch on. The first one that came in is, I'm going to read the question. Can a student claim their unmarried partner as their dependent if the partner is not working and the student provides financial support for that partner?
Oh,
Yes.
Stacy has more experience with this, and she says yes.
Yes, especially if they would claim that person on their taxes, if they would be head of household and claim that person, absolutely.
And I would concur as well. The second question that came in regarding FAFSA and financial aid related is, if a parent was married after the tax year needed on the FAFSA, in this case 2021, do both parents still need to provide 2021 taxes? The taxes would likely have been filed as single, or would only one parent have to provide in that case?
Both. Each of those parents, the parent and the step parent, or the both parents if they were unmarried but now are married, would create an FSA ID, and they would each be contributors on the FAFSA form, and they would separately input their tax information or agree to input their tax information. But yes, both of them are required.
Excellent.
And the reasoning behind that is they're looking at the household ability to contribute, not who was in the household in 2021, but who is in the household now, and what did those people earn in 2021?
Similarly, if there was a divorce since 2021 taxes, there would be a division of income for only the FAFSA parent. Kind of, yes.
Absolutely.
That was the last question. So that concludes all the questions that we had come in through the chat and the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.